Corvus stood in the center ring of the moon court with 9 pack standards rising around her like winter trees, and she could feel every eye in the hall waiting to see whether she would obey, refuse, or break. The scent braziers burned cedar and iron root, which meant the closing rite was active and legally binding, and once she spoke in that circle, no one could claim they had misheard her. The king was 3 steps away, dark coat, still shoulders, gaze fixed on her with the kind of attention that made the room shrink to one breath at a time. Cyrus Blackwood did not look uncertain in public, yet his hand remained open at his side instead of reaching for her, as if even now he would rather lose the throne than take 1 inch of her choice. On the high benches, Elder Bran of Stonewater leaned forward and said what everyone in the court had been trying not to say out loud. If she refuses, your reform falls with her. Your 6-pack quorum becomes 5. This assembly cannot stand. Corvus heard the number land in her chest. 9 packs in the realm, 6 needed for a ruling, one woman's voice balanced against old law and new rage. She was 23, a scent healer apprentice who spent most mornings cataloging wolfbane and birch ash in the lower archive, and now men who commanded valleys waited on her next sentence. Cyrus finally spoke, and he used the same restrained tone he had used when he called the assembly days earlier, as if he were reading a weather report instead of staking his rule. Corvus Thornwood, do you choose this vow freely? No title, no command, no pressure hidden behind ceremonial language. The entire court heard what he did there. He gave her exit before claim, even with allies threatening to walk and enemies waiting to call him weak. She swallowed once and looked past him to the registrar's bench where her aunt sat without her seal for the first time in 15 years. Mila Thornwood's hands were folded in her lap. Rhett Thornwood stood behind her with a black censure sash across his shoulder, jaw set, eyes bright with the old fury that came whenever the world did not hand him what he had already told himself was his. Corvus knew what this circle cost. She also knew what it answered. Her mouth opened, and the memory of a different room hit her so hard she almost lost the words. 2 winters earlier, after her mother's burial fire had gone out, Corvus had found a folded letter tucked inside the old scent ledger satchel, sealed in beeswax and wintermint, her mother's hand pressed into the wax while she was still alive and shaking. Never sign what you have not read. Never speak assent to what you have not chosen. Below it, in smaller script added later, her mother had written the line that refused to leave Corvus alone. If anyone files assent in your name, demand open hearing before all packs because private correction can be buried. That warning had looked simple when Corvus first read it in 2023, the year her mother died, and simple things had a way of becoming sharp in a place where everyone told you hierarchy was safety and obedience was gratitude. She drew one breath in the moon court, held Cyrus's gaze, and the story pulled back to the beginning of the wound that brought her here. In early 2025, before the midwinter moot, Corvus's life had been narrow enough to fit in her hands. She rose before first bell in the lower healer rooms, sorted scent herbs, ran records to the registrar hall, and avoided the raised walkways where higher-ranked families liked to stand and observe the flow of lower-ranked labor like river traffic. Her wolf had a fine nose and steady instincts, useful in medicine and records tracing, not useful in dominance contests, which made her easy to place and easier to ignore. She did not mind being ignored when she chose it. She minded being arranged. The Thornwood name still carried respect from her mother's years as a field registrar, a woman known for strict entries and strict fairness. Corvus had grown up following her through disputes about boundary scent marks and bond filings, listening to her mother ask both parties to repeat their assent twice before she touched ink to page. Consent was not decorative language in those days. It was law in practice. After her mother died in 2023, that practice thinned. Maela Thornwood took over as acting bond registrar and replaced deliberation with speed. She called it efficiency. She called it protecting family standing in unstable times. She called Corvus ungrateful whenever Corvus asked to read a file before it moved. Corvus had lived under Maela's roof since the funeral pyre, because grief did not cancel rent, and apprentices did not earn enough to maintain a den alone. She paid in labor, in silence, in errands that stretched from dawn to dark. Mila rewarded obedience with comments that sounded like praise until you listened closely. You could still make a decent match if you stopped challenging every process. You are not your mother, and this realm does not pause for sentiment. Rhett is willing to overlook your stubbornness. You should notice that. Rhett Thornwood, her older cousin by 3 years, had always treated rank like weather he personally controlled. At family gatherings he sat too close, spoke for her in front of elders, and framed every disagreement as immaturity. He had a competent patrol record and a smile people trusted too quickly. He also had a habit of gripping her wrist whenever he wanted to make a point privately, then loosening his hand before anyone else entered the room. Corvus learned to keep her voice level around him because level voices were harder to dismiss as hysteria. She also learned the cost of level voices. People mistook composure for consent whenever it suited them. The disputed filing happened in 2024, 3 moons after harvest, and Corvus did not know it existed until Winter Market Week, when a baker's wife hugged her and whispered, "I heard the pairing is nearly finalized. I hope he treats you kindly." Corvus asked what pairing. The woman blinked, looked embarrassed, and changed the subject. By dusk, she was in the registrar hall requesting her own record. Mela told her the stack was under review and she could not access active files. Corvus asked under which statute a registrant could be denied her own bond entry. Mela's lips tightened, and she told Corvus she was developing an unfortunate taste for public embarrassment. Corvus did not get the file that night. She got chores, extra ledger sorting, and a warning that respectful women did not interrogate legal process in hallways full of witnesses. She took the warning home, placed it beside her mother's letter, and read the letter again until dawn. The midwinter moot in 2025 opened under new snow, and every pack sent delegates to the Capitol Keep. Moot days always made Corvus nervous because hierarchy grew visible in architecture, raised seating tiers, ranked entrances, speaking order by bloodline. She worked those days as records runner, carrying sealed petitions from side benches to the law clerks and trying not to hear what people said when they thought a low-rank apprentice was furniture. That morning she carried a stack to the central aisle and saw her own name on top in Maela's hand, tagged to a provisional bond enforcement motion. Enforcement. Not discussion, not review, not petition for mutual assent. Enforcement. Her pulse hammered. She scanned the text while walking and nearly stumbled over the threshold line where common service rank ended and debating floor began. The filing requested formal social recognition of Corvus Thornwood as pledged to Rhett Thornwood pending final right, citing prior family assent and registrar discretion. Family assent, registrar discretion, no spoken assent from Corvus anywhere. She looked up and saw the king entering the hall. Cyrus Blackwood at 31 looked less like the stories and more like consequence. No crown sat on his head during moot, only the black iron torque at his throat that marked sovereign authority. People shifted when he crossed a room, not because he demanded it aloud, because his presence pulled order into place. Corvus had seen him only at a distance before, mostly during public decrees. Up close, she noticed the restraint first, the way he spent motion like coin. She should have handed the packet to a clerk and stepped back into service lanes. That was the safe path. Mela expected it. Rhett expected it. Every habit Corvus had built since 2023 pushed her towards silence. Instead, she stopped in the center aisle, in full view of 9-pack delegates, and raised her voice before fear could renegotiate. "I reject this bond filing. I did not agree to it. The hall went still with the speed of a trap closing. Mayela stood first, face white, then red. This is procedural confusion. My niece is distressed. Rhett took one step forward with an expression of injured patience. Corvus, this is not the place. She kept her eyes on the king because everyone else in that room had already shown what they would do with her voice. Standing law requires dual spoken assent before a registrar. I gave none. Elder Soren Vale, high law speaker, rose from the legal bench. He had mentored her mother years ago and had never once softened a ruling for sentiment. Acting Registrar Maella Thornwood, is there recorded spoken assent from both parties? Maella answered without hesitation. There is family assent sufficient for provisional filing. Soren's gaze sharpened. That does not answer my question. Cyrus looked at Corvus for a long second, and she misread the stillness as irritation. In her experience, powerful men disliked being interrupted by low-rank women with legal language in their mouths. He turned to the hall and spoke once. Enforcement is suspended. A collective inhale moved through the benches. His eyes returned to Corvus. Witness Thornwood, do you request closed mediation or full hearing? The question cracked the room open again. Corvus felt her fingers close around the folded paper inside her sleeve, her mother's letter, carried all morning like a talisman she had hoped not to use. She drew it out and held it where Soren and the clerks could see the seal. My mother warned this exact abuse in writing before she died, Corvus said. I enter it as intent exhibit and demand full hearing in open record. He continued, voice unchanged. I am invoking Crown emergency authority over interpack bond disputes. Full assembly of the 9 packs will convene today. Her case will be heard in open record. Corvus blinked, certain she had misheard. Emergency authority was used for border raids and succession violence. Not one contested provisional filing from a healer apprentice. Her demand and his order froze the motion immediately and forced every delegate to remain in session until formal assembly could be formed. Mela's mouth parted. Rhett stepped back as if struck. Elder Bran from Stonewater muttered to his neighbor, loud enough for half the hall to hear. The king halts government for one Thornwood girl. Corvus felt heat crawl up her neck. She had asked for correction, not spectacle. She had no idea she had just triggered the largest legal hearing of the winter. The assembly call resolved one obstacle at once, immediate coercion, and opened another that could ruin her just as quickly. Suspension protected her that hour, yet it also moved her dispute from family pressure into royal theater, where losing would not stay private. She was escorted from the moot floor by 2 neutral guards, who addressed her as Witness Thornwood, which sounded dignified until she noticed one stayed half a step behind her everywhere for the rest of the day. Witnesses in contested bond cases had rights on paper. They also had accidents in alleys. Tamsin Reed found her in the archive corridor near dusk, with bread wrapped in linen and a face that looked like she had been running for an hour. Tamsin worked as archive clerk. Quiet, careful, the kind of friend who remembered details no one else bothered to keep. You did it, Tamsin whispered, pressing the bread into her hand. You said it out loud. I might have just set fire to my life. Tamsin nodded. You also made legal challenge possible. Before this morning they could call it family process. Now it is public record. That night Corvus was barred from the Thornwood house. Mela's house steward met her at the gate with a travel satchel and a message delivered in flawless household tone. Acting Registrar. Mela requested distance until the assembly concluded. Rhett stood on the porch rail in shadow, arms crossed, offering no objection and no invitation. Corvus slept on a cot in the lower archive annex between record crates and dried mountain thyme. She was grateful for the roof, furious at the gratitude, and too tired to decide which feeling hurt more. Before sleep took her, she unfolded her mother's letter again. The paper smelled faintly of winter mint after 2 years. She traced the final line and understood something she had resisted since 2023. Her mother had not written a warning for abstract caution. She had written it because she knew this family could use process as a weapon, and because she expected Corvus might need to force a public record to survive it. Assembly week started at dawn with procedural oaths, witness registration, and challenges to admissible evidence. Corvus expected hostility from Mayella and Rhett. She did not expect how fast rumor turned her into symbol. By noon, some delegates called her brave in whispers, others called her unstable in groups, and several called her dangerous, because if she won, dozens of old provisional pairings could be reopened. Elder Soren assigned her a legal clerk for filings, then informed her in clipped terms that sentiment would not substitute for proof. If spoken assent is absent, show absence through chain of custody. If records were altered, show where. Corvus filed her mother's letter as intent exhibit before first recess, not as proof of Mayella's act on its own, as proof that coercive filing was foreseeable and privately unfixable, which locked the case into full hearing status under assembly procedure and prevented quiet settlement from burying it. Chain of custody in this realm relied on scent ink ledgers, a technique her mother had taught her as a child by letting her smell fresh entries before they cured. Scent ink carried layered markers, resin base, registrar oil print, date herb, and witness bind. Edits left traces in the chemistry and in the scent profile that trained noses could detect even after scraping. Corvus had that nose. Her apprenticeship made it useful in medicine, and now it might keep her from being legally erased. The first time she saw Cyrus during Assembly Week, he was in the high corridor outside Hearing Chamber 2, speaking to two pack marshals in low tones. She tried to pass without being noticed. His gaze lifted, pinned to her for 1 second too long, then moved on as if she were merely one witness among many. She read it as inspection, assessment of risk. Nothing personal. The audience in the hall saw what she did not, because one marshal asked, "Do we assign standard escort?" Cyrus answered, "Double watch on witness Thornwood. Rotate every 4 hours so no guard pattern can be tracked." Corvus was already around the corner and never heard him. On day 2, she gained access to a copy of her provisional filing. Tamsin had spent the night cross-indexing registrar submissions and found a discrepancy. The filing stamp date read, late autumn 2024. Yet the witness bind scent included spring nettle oil that was not stocked in the registrar hall until first thaw 2025. Either the hall had invented winter nettles, or someone edited the document later and resealed it. Corvus stared at the page, cold spreading from her hands inward. Tampering was no longer theory. It was likely. The proof resolved uncertainty and created a harder obstacle. If Mela had altered records, confronting her became unavoidable, and Corvus still wanted one impossible thing she hated herself for wanting. She wanted her aunt to deny it convincingly enough that she could retreat into confusion. She went to Mayella's chambers anyway. Mayella received her standing by the hearth, robes immaculate, registrar pin still at her throat for that hour. "You could have handled this privately. Did you file my provisional bond without spoken assent?" "I filed a pairing that protected family position. That is not assent." Myla's eyes hardened. "You think law is a temple. Law is weather control. People with rank shape storms before they arrive." Corvus held up the copy filing. "Why does a 2024 record carry 2025 seal sent?" For the first time, Mela looked away. Only a flicker. One heartbeat. Enough. "You are too young to understand what happens to unpaired women in this structure," Mela said quietly. "Rhett had agreed to keep you in Thornwood standing." "Keep you." Corvus felt nausea rise. The obstacle changed shape in that moment. She had entered hoping for correction. She left knowing the harm had been intentional and justified as care. She walked out with legs that did not feel connected to her body and found Rhett waiting in the corridor as if Mela had sent him to finish what conversation started. "You could end this tonight," he said. "Withdraw testimony, accept provisional status. We move to final right in spring. Everyone keeps dignity." I never gave a cent. "You do not need to perform purity for strangers. We are family." He reached for her wrist. Familiar gesture, familiar claim, and she stepped back before he touched skin. "Do not touch me." His expression shifted from coaxing to contempt in one blink. "If you exile yourself over pride, no pack will take you. You think the king called assembly because he believes you. He called it to preserve order." Fear tightened her throat, and old habits asked her to nod, apologize, survive. She did something else. She said the honest thing. "I would rather live nameless beyond border ice than belong to someone by forged paperwork." That sentence reached hearing chamber 3 before she did. In closed structures, news moved faster than mercy. By evening, she received an offer from a neutral clerk to file quiet exile in exchange for withdrawing witness status. Exile would end the case as personal withdrawal and preserve current bond practice. She could leave alive and disappear. She sat with the form for an hour, pen hovering over the line, feeling the exact texture of fear paralysis, body wanting escape, while conscience refused to sign. Her mother's warning letter lay folded beneath the form. Tamsin sat across from her without speaking, because real friends knew silence could hold a person steady better than advice. Corvus finally set the pen down. "I testify." The decision resolved paralysis and made evidence admissible under assembly rules. It also raised threat level immediately. Witnesses who stayed in public became targets for pressure. Pressure arrived before dawn. A storage brazier was overturned outside the annex where Corvus slept, filling the corridor with smoke and forcing evacuation. Guards called it an accident. Tamsin found boot scrape marks near the brazier stand and reported them. The first guard team dismissed her. By sunrise, Cyrus replaced the team. Corvus was in the infirmary with smoke-stung eyes when he entered with Elder Soren and 2 marshals. He did not ask how she felt. He looked at the physician chart, then at the marshal captain. "Witness Thornwood relocates to protected wing. Access by signed list only. Any unscheduled approach counts as interference with assembly process." He turned to Corvus, and she braced for command. He gave information instead. "You retain choice to continue or withdraw. No one can compel testimony." She nodded, voice rough. "I continue." His gaze held hers 1 second. "Good." He left before she could reinterpret the word. Corvus called his response political necessity and ignored the smaller truth her body noticed. He had arrived fast, too fast for routine procedure, and his anger had sharpened only when security failure was mentioned, not when legal embarrassment was. The next hearing day opened with Mela's counsel attacking Corvus's credibility. They presented character witnesses who described her as emotional, inconsistent, influenced by grief since her mother's death in 2023. Corvus listened without flinching because she had practiced that face for years. When it was her turn, she placed 4 items on the evidence table: disputed filing copy, herb inventory register, her mother's warning letter entered as intent exhibit, and her mother's original training note on scent ink validation. Elder Soren approved all 4 as preliminary exhibits. Corvus spoke clearly. The filing claims late autumn 2024. Witness bind contains spring nettle oil first stocked first thaw 2025. Edit occurred after original date. Counsel objected. Soren overruled pending scent verification. Maela watched from the bench with a look Corvus remembered from childhood. Disappointed, not guilty, as if Corvus had failed an exam by insisting mathematics still mattered. Verification required 2 independent noses. Tamsin qualified as archive clerk. The second verifier had to be a Crown-appointed assessor. Cyrus named himself. Gasps crossed the room. Kings did not serve as scent verifiers in routine hearings. Cyrus ignored the reaction, stepped down from the dais, and examined the page with ritual neutrality while Corvus tried not to track how close he stood. He inhaled once over the bind edge, once over the corrected line, once over the registrar seal. When he looked up, his expression remained unreadable. "Edit confirmed," he said. "Late spring marker over autumn base." The hall erupted. Corvus should have felt vindication. She felt vertigo. The king had just validated her claim with his own authority in front of every pack. She still told herself he did it for process integrity. That evening, Soren requested private witness prep in the old map room. Corvus entered expecting procedural drills and found Cyrus already there near the window, coat off, hands braced on the stone sill, shoulders carrying fatigue he never showed on the dais. Soren excused himself after setting documents, citing another session, leaving them alone in a room that smelled like wax and rain. Corvus considered leaving. Cyrus spoke first without turning. "My former betrothed sold border route maps to a rival court 5 years ago. 3 patrol teams died in the breach." The words landed with no ornament, no plea for sympathy. He faced her. "Since then I do not bind quickly. I do not trust easily. I do not mistake interest for safety." Corvus did not know what to do with the admission. She had spent a week reading his restraint as distance and his control as indifference. The revelation opened a narrow window into the man beneath statecraft, and she saw the wound clearly. Betrayal had taught him attachment could become an attack route. He continued, voice quieter. "When you challenged that filing at Moot, you stood where leverage usually stands. You chose principle against your own protection. I noticed." She felt heat rise and mistrust rise with it, because tenderness in dangerous systems could be another mechanism of control. "Why tell me now?" "Because tomorrow they will claim my decisions are personal. I need you to know they began with law." He took one step back, restoring distance himself. "Your testimony must be yours. If you choose silence, I will still suspend enforcement until session close." He left before she could answer. She stood alone among old maps, trying to fit this version of him beside the one she had built from fear. The almost understanding opened and closed in one night. By morning, new evidence threatened to destroy it. Maela's counsel produced a supplemental ledger strip showing what looked like Corvus's own scent mark on a preliminary ascent line from late 2024. If authentic, it implied she had once agreed and later recanted. Corvus stared at the strip and felt the floor tilt. She had never signed, never spoken assent, never marked that line. Her scent could be copied in diluted form from personal objects, a known abuse risk in old cases, yet proving forgery under public pressure was brutal. Rhett seized the moment. In cross-questioning, he played wounded devotion and asked whether grief from her mother's death had impaired memory. He addressed her as Little Fox once, an old family nickname, which made several elders grimace and several others nod as if intimacy proved his claim. Corvus's hands shook under the table. She could feel the hearing slipping. Tamsin leaned toward Soren and whispered urgently. Soren asked for recess and granted 10 minutes for chain validation on the supplemental strip. In recess, Tamsin dragged Corvus into archive side room and slammed a box of discarded practice seals onto the desk. Maela trained new clerks last spring with imitation scent transfer wax. I logged the supplies. If that strip used transfer wax, residue will carry bee smoke binder from training stock. Corvus blinked through panic and leaned over the strip sample under magnifier. There it was. Faint golden granules at the edge, bee smoke binder not used in official registry wax. This single detail resolved the immediate credibility attack and made law change actionable later, because tampering was no longer a family dispute. It was systemic vulnerability in registrar process. They returned to chamber with residue proof. Soren admitted it. Cyrus ordered full forensic review of all Thornwood provisional filings from 2024, including the original entry and the supplemental assent strip as linked tampered records. Mela closed her eyes for 1 second, then straightened. The final hearing convened under storm clouds, and by first bell, everyone in the capital knew a legal era was about to end or harden. 9 PAC delegations took seats. Quorum rule was read aloud, 6 PACs required for binding Royal Assembly rulings. 3 elders aligned against reform had already threatened to withdraw support from Cyrus if he invalidated unilateral provisional bonds realm-wide. Corvus sat at witness bench with Tamsin behind her and felt the paradox of this week in her bones. She had entered trying to stop one coerced pairing. She now sat inside a case that could reopen every forced provisional bond across 9 PACs. Soren opened with findings: no dual spoken assent recorded for Corvus and Rhett, probable record tampering in acting registrar office, unlawful social enforcement pressure documented, and the specific 2024 Thornwood provisional entry plus supplemental assent strip both flagged as altered through transfer wax. Mela was called. She admitted filing the provisional in 2024 without Corvus's spoken assent, defended it as protective custom, and denied malicious intent. Under questioning about transfer wax stock, she could not reconcile purchase logs with official usage. Rhett testified next, affirmed he believed family assent was sufficient, conceded he knew Corvus had objected repeatedly, and proceeded anyway. Cyrus listened without interrupting until all testimony closed. Corvus watched him and remembered the map room confession, remembered his order in the infirmary, remembered how often he had given her choice where others offered structure disguised as mercy. When he stood, the room stilled. "Ruling," he said. "Provisional bond between Corvus Thornwood and Rhett Thornwood is void. No assent, no validity." He paused as murmurs surged, then continued before resistance could gather shape. Effective immediately, unilateral provisional bond filings across all 9 PACs are suspended pending revalidation. Any bond lacking dual spoken assent before registrar and witness panel is invalid. Elder Bran rose in fury. "You abandon custom that maintained alliance for generations." Cyrus met his stare. "Custom that coerces without assent is unlawful." Bran signaled to Elders Yara and Odran. All 3 stood and announced withdrawal of political support from the Crown Coalition. The loss was real: trade routes, patrol sharing, council votes, and everyone in that chamber knew Cyrus had just traded stability for principle in open court. 2 undecided elders from Riverglass and Northfen rose next and demanded terms before they cast binding votes: legal protection for Corvus beyond Witness Week, and no private reversal through registrar channels after session close. Cyrus answered in the open record, ceding the Crown's winter levy arbitration seat and 1 procurement appointment to secure their signatures on a permanent protection writ. Interference with Corvus's legal filings would be prosecuted as Crown process obstruction, and any refiling against her would require direct assembly review. Those signatures restored the line at 6. Quorum count was called. 6 PACs remained in support, exactly enough to bind the ruling. The assembly clerk struck the record seal. Reform held, and Corvus's protection held with it, because he paid for both in front of everyone. Corvus exhaled a breath she had been carrying since Market Week in 2024. The legal verdict should have ended her role. It did not. Rulings could void coercion, yet they could not answer her wound unless she chose what came next herself. Closing right was scheduled at moonrise for 2 declarations: formal installation of legal reforms and, by Cyrus's request, an optional personal vow if Corvus wished to speak one. Optional was repeated 3 times in the written notice. She nearly declined. Choosing publicly after surviving coercion felt dangerous in a new way. Refusal had been survival. Choice demanded trust in her own voice, not merely resistance to others. Before moonrise, she visited the old garden behind the registrar wing where her mother had taught her scent mapping as a child. Snow rested on the stone benches. Tamsin joined her with 2 cups of bitter bark tea and no strategy, only presence. What if choosing him makes me look like this was always about romance? Corvus whispered. Tamsin sipped tea, eyes on the snow. You challenged law before you trusted him. Everyone saw that. Choosing now does not erase the fight, it completes it. Corvus smiled once, small and tired. You are too wise for someone who misfiles half her personal notes. Tamsin snorted. My personal notes are organized by emotional urgency. The laugh broke tension for 3 breaths, enough to let Corvus feel her body again. She stood, brushed snow from her coat, and looked toward the mooncourt lights. She knew exactly what hesitation she had to resolve. She had spent 2 years believing being chosen by family or rank always came with conditions she could not negotiate. If she entered that ring tonight, she would enter on terms she spoke herself. She also knew what became possible after that. A life where her voice was not evidence to be attacked, only truth to be heard. Moon Court filled before full dark. Reform seals were read first, registrar standards rewritten. Mandatory dual spoken assent before registrar and witness panel. Auditable sent ink chain with independent custody checks. Elder Soren announced immediate review dockets for disputed filings from every pack. The law was no longer custom wrapped in hope. It had teeth. Mela stood for disciplinary order. Soren removed her registrar seal publicly and reassigned her to a border records post without bond authority. He also read the specific sanction into record. The tampered 2024 Thornwood entry and the fabricated supplemental assent strip were struck, marked void in the chain ledger, and preserved as misconduct exhibits for registrar training. Mila accepted in silence, eyes fixed ahead. Corvus watched with a grief that surprised her. Mila had harmed her, defended harm, and still this ending felt like a funeral for what family might have been. Rhett received formal censure, loss of mating petition privileges for 3 years, and removal from moot representation. He bowed stiffly and left under escort, status reduced to what conduct had earned. Tamsin Reed was called last. Cyrus approved Soren's recommendation and appointed her deputy registrar on probationary term. Tamsin looked stunned, then squared her shoulders and accepted with a voice that barely shook. Only after all sanctions and appointments were complete did Cyrus ask Corvus to step into the central ring. She crossed the stones slowly, aware of every banner and every witness. He waited inside the circle with hands at his sides, no reaching. Corvus Thornwood, he said, and the whole court listened for coercion that never came. You owe no vow, you owe no answer tonight. If you choose to speak, speak only what is yours. The words unknotted something deep in her chest. She turned once to face the assembly, voice clear enough to carry to upper benches. In 2024, a provisional bond was filed for me without my spoken assent. In 2025, I rejected that filing at moot, because law without consent is coercion with better clothing. A murmur moved through the crowd. She continued, gaze shifting to Cyrus. You halted enforcement before I trusted you. You protected my witness status when pressure came. You bound your authority to my choice in public, not private. I choose in the same light. She stepped closer, close enough to see the old scar at the base of his throat from a patrol bite years ago, close enough to feel her wolf rise, alert and unafraid. My vow is explicit, she said. I choose Cyrus Blackwood as mate and king consort partner by my own will, with full right to speak assent and dissent in our bond and in our governance. I choose him, knowing his history, knowing mine, and knowing this choice costs us both. Cyrus's composure shifted for the first time all week. The smallest crack at the corner of his eyes, relief and disbelief meeting in one human expression. He faced the 9 banners before he answered, and for the first time he named the old wound in public. After my former betrothed sold our patrol routes, I swore no one would stand in this ring because of me, unless I could offer safety without ownership. Tonight I break that oath by choice, and by law. When he answered her directly, his voice carried roughness she had never heard. I claim Corvus Thornwood with her consent, before 9 packs under revised law, for life. The bond right activated on dual assent. Cedar braziers flared gold. Witness seals were struck. No one could dispute the record. In the brief stillness after the rite, Corvus felt the old abandonment wound answer itself in concrete form. She was not hidden. She was not arranged. She was not tolerated conditionally behind closed doors. The highest authority in the realm had chosen her in the exact public space where she had once expected humiliation, and he had done it by reinforcing the principle that protected her from him as much as from anyone else. The audience in that court understood what changed beyond romance. The throne had declared that consent was not courtesy, it was structure. Later, when formalities ended and the court thinned, Cyrus walked beside her through the west corridor toward the newly assigned queen consort rooms near the governance wing. He did not speak for several minutes, giving her the same unforced quiet he had offered in every critical moment. At last he said, "I expected you might refuse tonight. I considered it." He glanced at her, almost smiling. "I know." She looked ahead at the corridor lamps and allowed herself a small, honest answer. "I spent years mistaking control for safety. You made space for choice, and I did not know what to do with that at first." He stopped near an open balcony where snow drifted across the courtyard and faced her fully. "You will disagree with me in council. Likely often. Good." No speech about destiny followed, no claim that love erased governance conflict. Their partnership began where their story had demanded it begin, with clear terms and chosen risk. Over the next months, those terms held in visible ways. Corvus kept her healer apprenticeship hours twice a week by choice, arguing that a consort disconnected from lower halls would become ornamental. Cyrus backed the schedule despite council complaints about optics. She chaired the new consent audit board with Soren and Tamsin, reviewing disputed provisional bonds from all 9 packs. The workload was brutal. The outcomes were measurable. By first harvest under the reform, 62 provisional filings had been reviewed, 19 voided for absent assent, 12 amended after renewed dual declarations, and the rest confirmed valid through proper witness process. Every number was posted publicly at moot entrance. Maella's transfer to border post remained in effect. Corvus received one letter from her aunt in late autumn, terse, unsentimental, acknowledging that registrar authority had gone stale under pressure and that exile had taught Maella what silence sounded like when no one deferred to her. No apology appeared. Corvus read it twice and placed it in archive file under resolved family matters, because closure did not always arrive in the shape people wanted. Rhett petitioned for censure reduction after 1 year and was denied under the new standards he had once mocked. He took a patrol command in a distant valley where his name carried less inherited weight. Reports later described competent work and no further bond complaints. Corvus accepted that as enough. Elder Bran and the 2 allied elders who had withdrawn support maintained political distance for a season. Cyrus kept the concessions he traded during the final hearing in force through winter, levy arbitration seat and procurement appointment, both ceded as promised, to preserve the protection writ that shielded Corvus and every future witness from quiet retaliation. The 3 elders returned to limited cooperation when border trade losses cut into their own winter reserves. Cyrus negotiated terms without retracting reform or weakening the writ. Cost had been paid. The ruling stood. Tamsin thrived as deputy registrar, surprising no one who had watched her survive years of being overlooked. She instituted double verifier scent checks for all provisional entries and trained junior clerks to challenge rank pressure explicitly in record notes. She also continued misfiling personal notes by emotional urgency and refused correction. On the anniversary of the assembly, Corvus and Cyrus returned to the moon court after dusk without ceremony. Snow had started again. She stood in the same ring where she had once felt the whole realm balancing on her throat. "You are quiet," he said. "I am counting what changed." He waited. She touched the oath stone and spoke as if reading ledger truth aloud. "In 2023, my mother died warning me not to sign what I had not read. In 2024, my assent was forged. In 2025, I rejected that bond publicly, and you called assembly instead of silencing me. Today, girls in lower halls can request their own records without registrar permission slip. That is a different world." Cyrus looked at her with that same focused attention that had unsettled her at Moot and steadied her at the right. "You built much of it." "We did." He reached for her hand, asked with his eyes, waited for her nod, then laced his fingers through hers. The gesture was small and entirely consistent with the law they had written into each day. Corvus felt the old disbelief stir and settle, the instinct that told her chosen things could be withdrawn without warning. The instinct no longer ran her life. It simply reminded her what had been true before this. She looked at the banners, 9 of them, and remembered standing alone under their weight. She was not alone now, and she had not arrived here by being rescued. She had arrived by refusing coercion, naming harm, testifying under threat, and choosing openly when fear offered quieter roads. Cyrus had met her there with his own cost, losing 3 elder allies, exposing old betrayal in open court, and binding his authority to a rule that limited his own reach. That was why she trusted him. Not because he was king, because he chose limits where kings usually chose convenience. The court lamps flickered in the wind. Corvus leaned into him lightly and let herself believe in the life they had built in record and in practice. Healer mornings, council nights, disagreements that ended in clearer law, and a bond that remained alive because both voices inside it remained free.